All right, hello kids. Live to video from an undisclosed location, Houston Heights. We are going to go over the first half of chapter 12, which is going to look at the conservative order post the Congress of Vienna in 1815. So let me share the screen here, and we're going to look at the review questions that I had made up for everybody. And I tried to put quick phrases and things like that that you can add to yours if you want to, if you just want to listen. Obviously, you can do that as well. I'm going to elaborate on these things. You can always pause me if you're taking notes while listening to this, but let's get started. All right, so just basic review. Excuse me. When we last left off, we had talked about the Congress of Vienna, which was the meeting in 1815 that is attempting to reconcile Europe with the Napoleonic era, with the revolution and the ideas that had been exported throughout the continent. And it is going to be a conservative reaction against the liberal French Revolution and the expansion of liberal ideas under Napoleon. So the main goals of the representatives at the Congress of Vienna was that they wanted to restore the monarchs who had been removed from their throne. Louis XVI is removed from the throne and executed in France. We will see his brother, Louis XVIII, deliberately choosing to skip the 17th because Louis XVI did have a son who died in prison during the Revolution. He should have been the rightful Louis XVII. And then elsewhere, if you remember, Napoleon had replaced crowned monarchs with members of his own family or himself. They're going to put those people back into power. And the basic idea is that representative government leads to dictatorships like Napoleon, and that threatens order. The kings, for all their flaws, which no one probably is going to admit that there's any flaws with them here, they maintained a much more peaceful sort of reign over Europe. At least that's the argument. And then the second thing is creating a balance of power, preventing a future France from becoming so dominant that they can alter the course of European politics. Okay, and of course, the architect of this, oh, hey, look, it's world famous Congress of Vienna scholar, Missy. Let's see if she has any thoughts on this. No? Okay. All right, so Metternich is going to be the architect of the Congress of Vienna, and I just thought we would look at a little picture of Metternich here. It's always funny to me when you look at these pictures, it's like, this is the dude that was like the architect of the conservative order in Europe from 1815 to 1848. It always strikes me, you feel like they should be like these big imposing giants. No comment, I guess, on what I think Metternich looks like, except I don't think he's a big imposing giant. But mentally, ideologically, he is going to be super important. Okay, our second question that is a little bit of review is just reminding us of the idea of the concert of Europe. This was a conservative alliance, if you want to call it that, between Russia, Austria, and Prussia in particular. And they wanted to protect the status quo. And they wanted to, in particular, maintain Christianity as an important institution and pillar of European society. And they're going to put forth the idea that European nations, specifically Austria, Prussia, Russia, had the right to actually interfere in the internal politics of a nation, even if it didn't go outside their borders. They could go inside and prevent a revolution, prevent an attack on the church, prevent an attack on the monarchy, to preserve the peace. The Revolution of France in 1789 taught European leaders that revolution in one place oftentimes leads to revolution in other places as well. And actually, they're right about this. As we will see in 1830 and 1848, both of those events are going to be triggered by events in France. We will see spasms of revolution in other places. And so this is actually not a foolish notion that they are entertaining here. And we will actually see involvement in the internal politics by France, of all people, in 1820 in Spain. We'll get to that. Okay, so that is where we are. So now let's talk about what is actually going on. So basically, we're going to see the emergence of new ideologies that are going to compete for legitimacy. They're going to compete for implementation. And the conservatives are in charge at this point in time. And conservative politicians are going to seek to preserve three fundamental pillars of society as they see it. And that is the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the state-sponsored churches. or, you know, the traditional pillars of an orderly society, the things that have been there and providing order forever and ever and ever in their eyes. Now, of course, all of these things came under attack during the French Revolution and the subsequent Napoleon invasions as well. We see the abolition of aristocratic privilege. We see the seizure of noble and church lands. We see the loss of like the official, this is the official religion of a particular place. The Catholic Church is going to lose a lot of prestige and positioning within society. And of course, monarchs are going to be removed from their throne. They're going to have all sorts of rules thrust upon them. So all three of these things, the conservatives are going to say is the foundation of an orderly society. And look what happened. The French Revolution attacked these things, and what happened? Decades of war and violence and awfulness. Okay? So these conservatives are going to be in power after Vienna, and they are going to resist any sort of discussion about, well, many things, but in particular, constitutions. There's two things about constitutions that really rankle conservatives. Number one, the idea of popular sovereignty, the idea that government gets its power from the consent of the people. Here, king, you have these powers because we give it to you. They're going to find that quite an onerous idea. And so they will resist constitutions on those sort of bounds. They will say, nah, I have power because I have legal treaties dating back generations and centuries that give me the power to rule over you, and I don't get any power from you. I rule over you without question. Even monarchs during this time that do allow for constitutions, like Louis XVIII in France, is going to say, hey guys, here is a guideline of government, but it's my gift to you. You are not foisting this upon me. And then secondly, they will resist representative government. The aristocracy in particular does not think that representative government will protect their privileges and their property and their cushy position in society. They are very fearful of this, which again, it's totally understandable. They did suffer greatly in the French Revolution. And so there is also this belief that representative government leads to dictatorship and despotism and all that sort of stuff as well. I want to go back real quick. The second thing that they're opposed to with constitutions is the argument's going to be the job of a king is so vast and so detailed and so difficult, you can't possibly come up with a framework that could adequately provide the powers that are needed for all those sorts of things. And then just in general, and there are a lot of things in here, they're going to be against any sort of Enlightenment idea, especially those that talk about rationality within society. Particularly the Catholic Church, who their sacred revealed ideas were challenged by the rational critiques of Enlightenment philosophers. And so like revealed Christianity becomes, has the spotlight shined on it by rational inquiry. And that's, you know, that's a tough thing for the church to have to deal with. And the biggest area that the Catholic Church is going to insist upon is that they are the educators of society. Because of course, the church is going to teach that the conservative pillars are the bulwark of a safe and functioning society, and that it's God's will that you follow these sorts of things. They are not going to promote a individualistic, rationalistic idea like the Enlightenment schools would. All right. Now, if you access your PSP, which I realized I forgot to open. Oh, no, I did open it up. If you access the PSP, you can see here we have a secret memo that Metternich wrote to the Tsar in 1820. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but basically he's saying now right here, if you see in the second full paragraph, kings have to calculate the chances of their very existence in the immediate future. Passions are let loose and league together to overthrow everything which society respects as the basis of its existence: religion, public morality, laws, customs, rights, and duties. I mean, that sounds really bad. Of course, he's talking about things like constitutional government, representative government, popular sovereignty, all the things that are the basis of modern Western society. But these ideas are radical at the time, and they are very unpopular with these conservative politicians, right? And so basically what Metternich is saying is that the age of the Enlightenment that ushered in this idea about rationality, and in particular, the importance of the individual, is a direct threat to order and stability and civilization itself. Metternich is a arch conservative, if you didn't pick up what he was trying to tell you there. Okay. One more quick note, we're using conservative and liberal. These, of course, are 19th century definitions. They will change in the 21st century. What it means to be liberal conservative does not mean the same thing. Standard disclaimer, I'm sure you guys already figured that out. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. And now we're gonna get away from conservatism, but one last little note here. Number 6 is where I am on the Google Doc. And basically, Kagan is going to make the argument that this conservatism is just as new of an ideology as like liberalism and nationalism, that this ideology didn't exist before. And some of you may be thinking like, wait a minute, that's all we've talked about for a semester are absolute monarchy, privileged aristocracy, and state-sponsored churches. So how can this ideology be a new sort of thing? Well, basically, while these things have always existed, their vulnerability didn't. Prior to 1789, they were the unquestioned dominators of society and actually were quite contentious with one another. They were always angling and scheming and plotting to try and gain more power. Nobles would often try to resist the king. We're not going to see that anymore. The church and the king would scuffle over control. We won't see that anymore. All three of them realize, holy cow, we are in an endangered groups of people here. We need to sort of circle the wagons and fend off all these challenges. And so philosophers like Edmund Burke, who promote these conservative principles, are new in that before 1789, before the French Revolution unleashed attacks on these things, they never saw a need to sort of argue that they all worked in tandem and were all, necessary for the functioning of society. They had fought against each other. Those days are over. They realize we can't afford to be a divided house here. Okay, so hopefully that explains conservatism to you. It is going to be the dominant political force, but it will face some challenges. And there are going to be 3 major challenges, and really we're going to focus on 2 of them because I feel like the third one you have already studied in world history, a little bit of US history, and I just don't believe it's going to be a major part of the AP Euro test. Sometimes you just got to choose what's the most important things to focus on. So the 3 challenges in the 19th century that we will see, and this is the order that we will go in them for, is nationalism, liberalism, and then the colonial revolutions, particularly in Spanish America, with the overthrowing of Spanish colonial control and the emergence of new Enlightenment-inspired regimes. Now, this had already started prior to the 19th century. The American Revolution, obviously, is late 18th century. Haiti is happening during the Napoleonic era, but it's the continuation of these revolutions based on Enlightenment ideas that challenge the conservative order in Europe. Okay, so let's talk about what it means to be a nationalist. Thankfully, I don't think you guys are under the notion anymore that nationalism means patriotism. This is sort of how it's taught in middle school. It's an easier concept to sort of wrap your mind around, but really what nationalism means is that you believe that the political boundaries of a state should reflect the cultural and historical and linguistic realities of the people who live there. And that is a little complicated. So let me show you a map and talk about it here. So let's look at the Ottoman Empire here, right? The Ottoman Empire is a large land-based empire that is made up of Turkish-speaking, Muslim-practicing rulers. They rule over populations that are not all Turkish nor all Muslim, and they are going to say, well, we have the right to rule over this territory because we conquered these territories and we signed peace treaties and we are the rightful rulers of those things. I just picked the Ottoman Empire. We could talk about Russia. We could talk about the Austrian Habsburgs. All of these empires in Central and Eastern Europe are multinational empires. They contain lots of different types of people who speak different languages, who sometimes practice different religions, who have different cultural sorts of history. Now, For the dawn of time, no one has really ever challenged this notion. But beginning in the 19th century, some of these nationalist groups are going to say, we don't want to be a part of a Turkish-dominated society. What we want to do is blow that Turkish-dominated political entity up and redraw the boundaries so that all, let's say, Serbian people live within a country known as Serbia, right? That is nationalism. So, I mean, yes, it is patriotism in a sense, but it's also a desire to craft a nation state around a shared national identity, which really that only exists in over here. I guess you can't see my finger. France, England, maybe the Spanish, but everywhere else in Europe, no one is really united by nationalist sort of realities. So here's another important thing about nationalism. It is a two-way street. I just gave you an example of how nationalism is a threat to society because it seeks to blow up established political entities and create smaller fragments within those entities. Like the Ottoman Empire is going to face great challenges in the Balkans, in this area right here. Serbia and Greece are both going to have nationalist-inspired revolutions in the 1820 and 1830, I believe. But nationalism can also be a unifier. The German states are 39 autonomous states that share German language and culture and history. And many intellectuals at first, and eventually some leaders, we're not there yet, but we'll get there, are going to say, hey, instead of having a divided Germany, what if we created a united Germany? So nationalism is this radical new concept that seeks to redraw the boundaries of Europe based on national identity. And it has the ability to both blow up, to fragment large political units. And so those big, large multinational empires are going to oppose it with great resistance and fury. Russia, Austria, Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, they're imperiled by these ideas of nationalism. But nationalism can also unite, right? The German states, Italy, these are two places. Germany and Italy do not exist in a political sense in this time that we're talking about right now, in 1815, post-Congress of Vienna. But during the 19th century, we'll get to it when we get to chapter 14, they will unite and they will become unified nation states under a national identity. They will become Germany, Italy, right? So it's a big deal. Kagan makes the point that this is going to be the most potent force in European politics in the 19th century. It extends into the 20th century. It is going to be directly responsible for the outbreak of World War I. I would argue it's an even bigger issue. I would argue it's still a huge issue today, although maybe not as prominent as it once was. Okay, so hopefully you now get a sense of nationalism there. So list areas that will face these challenges. Well, we're going to get into this a lot more in detail today. So I'm just going to leave that up there and let you look at it. But basically, almost everywhere. Even Britain, which is a unified nation state, has control of Ireland, and the Irish are going to begin to agitate for greater autonomy and eventual independence that will begin really in earnest in the second half of the 19th century, which again, we will return to in another video. Okay, so just take a look at this right here, all these places. We will talk about Austria and nationalism in particular in the next video I post when we get to the revolutions of 1848, because nationalism plays a big role in those revolutions. Okay, so that's it for nationalism for now. We just wanted to establish the basic definitions of these things. We're going to come back to them. So as long as you just understand, it's about redrawing boundaries. It's about creating new nations based on an idea of a national identity that is based on a linguistic, cultural, historical connectivity. That's what nationalism is. Okay. Liberalism. So 19th century liberalism, or classic liberalism, is basically just people who believe in the Enlightenment, right? They are people who are going to call for many of the things that we spent a lot of the end of last semester talking about: representative government, constitutional government, laissez-faire economic policies, and this idea of like civic equality is the way I want to put that. And so who are liberals in the 19th century, particularly in the first half of the 19th century? Well, they are who you would expect. Bougie types, upper middle class, lawyers, doctors, accountants, educated professionals who possess property, who are going to demand to have a right to say what goes on with their political systems, right? They want constitutional government that limits the power of government so that government can't deprive them of their private property and their freedom to pursue wealth. They want fair tax codes. They want to have an ability to shape sort of tax by electing representatives to assemblies who work in tandem with a monarchy, right? They are going to favor civic equality, the elimination of aristocratic privilege, which is accomplished in the French Revolution in 1789. They are going to want to have freedom of religion and free speech and press and expression and all those sorts of things, right? These ideas, though, do not extend to all people. They are not Democrats. And I don't mean the Democratic Party. I'm talking about lovers of democracy. They believe in representation for themselves. They do not believe in extending that to all people. They are not universal suffragettes, or at least universal male suffragists. They are going to say, we cannot let the lower class get involved. Those guys are idiots. And we'll talk about that here in a second. We're going to look at Benjamin Constant's quote. So I'm going to come back to that concept. But let's talk economically. Economically, they are disciples of Adam Smith. They are disciples of the physiocrats of France who wanted to create laissez-faire, free market, capitalistic principles, whatever synonym you want to use for this. Basically, they're the bourgeoisie. They want to craft laws that allow them to do whatever they can with their property so that they can make as much profit as possible, and the government won't interfere with those actions. Right? So they are against government regulations, they are against guilds, they are against mercantilistic restrictions, they are against religious restrictions like, oh, you can't charge too much interest on a loan. Hey, let people do whatever they want. If I want to give a loan and Missy wants to take it at 50% interest, well, she's a big cat. She can make those financial decisions for herself. Let's talk real quickly about the Corn Laws. So the Corn Laws are an example of governmental regulation of the economy that bougie types are going to just like, it's going to make their skin crawl. So Parliament in in England is going to pass a law basically that tries to protect English landowners from international competition in the global food market. Essentially, English landowners who dominate Parliament are going to pass a law that raises a tariff on imported foodstuffs. What they're going to call corn, it really just means grain, food. And so what that's going to do, it's going to artificially inflate the price of that food that's coming from abroad, which will then allow British farmers to also sell their food at a high cost, but not as high as the imported stuff, and they'll make a nice tidy profit. And the liberal economists like Thomas Malthus or Jeremy Bentham are going to say, what are we doing? Like, why is this law protecting a small fragment of English society when really we should remove all barriers and allow for the free exchange of food and let the market determine who's successful and who's not successful? And so the Corn Laws, although not the same idea as the game laws as earlier, show how English Parliament is still representing aristocratic issues in the 19th century. Now, there is going to actually be an anti-Corn Law League that is going to work against this. We'll probably read about this more when we look at the economics of the 19th century, which is the next unit. So put a pin in that. But that is a great example of what liberal types want. Also, we have to stray a little bit here because it's going to matter later on. Liberals at this time have no interest in the social question. Now, this is where the class gets difficult. I'm splitting the 19th century up into two units, right? We're doing politics, then we're going to do economics. But politics are influenced by economics. We have to be aware of what's going on. And basically, all throughout the 19th century, society is rapidly changing. Industrialization is taking place. Urbanization is happening rapidly. And there are a lot of pain associated with the transition from a traditional rural agrarian society to an industrial urban wage labor. I almost said wage labor relationship. And so we're seeing a growing number of urban working class people who don't possess property, who are not allowed to participate in the political system, and they're getting restless and they are very upset about the poor quality of their life, to put it simply. And they're going to begin to say, hey, look, if we're going to talk about this idea of civic equality, that all men are created equal, don't we need to address economic and social inequality then? This is the beginning of Marxism and socialist ideas and things like that that are only going to grow more popular as the century moves on, as the working class becomes a larger and larger part of the population. Liberals are going to say, yeah, no, we're not messing with anything having to do with the social question, which is fine. That is their prerogative. But the problem is that when unrest comes to Europe in like 1848, the liberal politicians who are going to seek to make reforms are going to use the working class to help them overthrow the conservative governments, but then they're not going to give their working class allies anything in return for their support, and the revolutions will explode because of that. You're going to read about these revolutions. We're going to talk about it. I think we're posting it on Monday, so we'll return to it. So the social question is going to be a thing that we have to talk about. Okay. What does 11 say here? Oh, the constant quote. So let's just take a look at old Benjamin. He is saying some things here, isn't he? Right? Like, hey, Ben, man, you're talking out loud here. I hope you're aware of this. This doesn't age well. But he says, those whom poverty keeps in eternal dependence, right there, very judgy, dependence, are no more enlightened on public affairs than children, nor are they more interested than foreigners in national prosperity, of which they do not understand the basis and of which they enjoy the advantages only indirectly. Property alone, by giving sufficient leisure, renders a man capable of exercising his political rights. So this is very representative of how liberal minded people in the 19th century felt about lower class peeps. No interest in giving them the right to vote, no interest in addressing the social and economic inequalities within the system. They are going to say, they'll hand wave it away. They'll say, they're lazy, they're stupid. We shouldn't do anything for them because they're nothing more than children. They don't deserve those sorts of things. It's a harsh take today, but it's very much what they believed at the time. So just remember, when we're talking about these liberal politicians, everything that they call for is for their benefit, but they're not looking to expand that sort of circle. Marx will not like the bourgeoisie, as we will see when we read the Communist Manifesto in a little bit. Uh-oh, the cat knocked the computer down. Okay, so let us return back. I'll just have to hold the computer up now the rest of the time. Briefly summarize the main ideas of liberal philosophers. Okay, Malthus is a liberal philosopher. He is going to talk about the inevitability of mass starvation. Basically, he believed that food production would not be able to keep pace with human population, and that there would be a great starve off, and that this was an inevitable and nothing really should be done about it. This theory that Malthus has about food production and population growth is based on the idea that many liberal types, bourgeois types, believe that the working class are drunks and fornicators, that all they do is get drunk and have too many children that they can't support already. And so a lot of people are saying, like, we need welfare, we need to support the less fortunate. And liberal philosophers like Malthus will say, no, if you do those things, basically you'll just give them the sustenance they need to produce more children, that they will always breed themselves into poverty. And that's going to result in population crushes, which is going to make mass starvation a reality. There's nothing we can do about it. We shouldn't do anything. Just let things go. I know this sounds crazy harsh. Ricardo is the same thing. Ricardo's going to talk about the iron law of wages. And basically what he says is that there's arguments like, hey, we should create a minimum wage law and we should raise up the lower class by paying them a livable wage. Well, Ricardo will say, if you raise wages for the working class, they'll just fornicate more, that means sexually reproduce kids, and have more children, so that their level of poverty will never improve because they can't control their carnal lust. They can't stop procreating. They will just keep procreating to the level where they live at now. So raising wages is pointless. It doesn't do any good. If you raise wages, It will just result in more working class kids who will eventually create a glut in the labor market, which will cause wages to drop because the laws of supply and demand. Then you'd have to artificially inflate them again, and the cycle would repeat itself. Finally, there is a PSP by Jeremy Bentham, or there's a source in the PSP by Jeremy Bentham where he talks about the concept of utility. And we generally understand utility as government should pursue the policy that is beneficial to the most of the people. And so we hear that today and we think like, oh yeah, government should pass laws that are for the good of the public good. And that makes it seem like Jeremy Bentham would be a fan of like social safety, social security, welfare, whatever you want to use for it. But that's not what he's talking about. When he talks about utility and making laws for the most of the public good, what he's talking about is laissez-faire liberal economic policies that benefit the bourgeoisie. Let people do what they want to do with their property. Do not regulate the economy. Do not institute safeguards for others. Just let there be winners and losers, gods and clods, whatever term you want to use. Okay. Liberals and nationalists, now that we've reached the end of this, basically, they're not necessarily the same people. Some nationalists do want to see liberal political reforms and liberal economic policies, but not always. And some liberals may support national unification, but not necessarily. It just depends on who we're talking about and where. Sometimes, though, we will see that liberals and nationalists work together because they see a common cause that they can wrap around. Like in Italy, for example, many of the nationalists in Italy who strive for Italian independence are also Republican, meaning they want to create a representative government. But you know, it just depends. We'll look when we look at nationalist issues, we will look and see who the leaders are. Here is the irony of ironies, which we're going to get to. Liberal nationalists try to unify and try to accomplish goals, and they always fail in the 19th century. There will be two great nationalist success: Germany's unification and Italian unification, both led by nationalists who are conservative. Both of those countries will be ruled by basically absolute monarchs when it's over. Camillo di Cavour is an Italian prime minister who serves the king of Piedmont, which is an Italian state. I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically, he unites the whole continent under that guy's rule. Otto von Bismarck works for the Prussian Tsar or Kaiser. Yeah, we'll call him Kaiser, Prussian Kaiser, and he leads a movement that eventually leads to the formation of Germany, and Germany becomes a conservative, autocratic powerhouse. So eventually nationalism is going to be co-opted by conservative politicians. If you're asking yourself, how the heck does that happen? We'll get there. None of those things are happening right now. What we are going to see is that any calls early on after the end of the Congress of Vienna, basically 1850 to 1830, the conservative order is going to smack down any attempts at liberal or nationalist reforms, and we're going to take a look at some of those right now. The Carlsbad Decrees. German students, young, had fought in the Napoleonic Wars, infused with great patriotic pride at defeating Napoleon, looks at France and says, look at how great Napoleon was with the united France. Imagine if Germany, instead of licking the boots of these French who come and take advantage of all our 39 independent kingdoms, imagine if we united them all. We'd dominate. We'd be great. We should totally do that. And they start forming student groups called the Burschenschaften. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Who knows? And they start calling for unification. And, you know, some of them are liberal and calling for liberal reforms to the government. And Metternich catches wind of this. There are opponents to this. And one of them is like a playwright. He is going to be assassinated by a student who is a member of these Burschenschaften groups. And Metternich will use that as a reason to shut down the Burschenschaften, to impose censorship and tight controls on the universities. There was a primary source in this that I asked you to read, the Carlsbad Decree. This right here makes my blood run a little cold. It says, the confederated governments mutually pledge themselves to remove from the universities or other public educational institutions all teachers who by obvious deviation from their duty or by exceeding the limits of their functions or by the abuse of their legitimate influence over the youthful minds, your poor youthful minds, just so vulnerable to my manipulation. Be careful. I'm a snake in the grass, guys. or by propagating harmful doctrines hostile to public order or subversive or existing government institutions, shall have unmistakably proved their unfitness for the important office entrusted in them. Basically, if your liberal teacher starts spouting off some nonsense, you can contact the federales and they'll get fired. This is why I'm a strong supporter of monarchy, as I let known before I had to start teaching from home. So, long live the king. Anywho, they're going to shut down these student groups. They're going to censor people. They're going to make sure that these things don't get talked about. And so there's that. In England, there is a lot of economic problems in England. Basically, they are rapidly industrializing. They're the first ones to do so. And so their problems come to the forefront first. There are a series of meetings and protests by working class type peoples, these public demonstrations that really freak out the conservative powers that be in parliament. They worry about a armed insurrection or violent protests. And so eventually there's going to be a crackdown on these public demonstrations that the working class is involved in. It's known as the Peterloo Massacre, where basically groups of workers are meeting and they are smacked down by British, military, if that's what you want to call it. So the working class restlessness and calls for reforms and calls for addressing of their suffering is met with a conservative backlash and repression. It eventually results in the passage of the 6 Acts, which I can read what they entail right now real quickly. Let me go to my trusted notes. And it says, number 1, no large or unauthorized public meetings. Number 2, we can increase fines for the crime of sedition and or libel. Number 3, we are going to have faster trials for political agitators so we can get those dangerous ne'er-do-wells off the streets and into prison where they belong. We are going to increase the taxes we charge on printed newspapers. We are going to disallow, that's not the word, forbid, there it is, training for armed groups. You can't train in public and arm and all that stuff. And then officials could search home of known trouble spots or known troublemakers, right? So basically search and seizures, a restriction of civil liberties in the name of public order, right? Very similar to the Carlsbad decrees, not in actions necessarily, but in the conservative government saying, well, hold on a second now. We don't like these crazy ideas that you are propagating, and so we are going to snuff them out before they can result in revolution, in instability. And then we come to France. So France, after the revolution, sees the Bourbon Restoration take place. What we see here is that King Louis XVIII is actually pretty moderate, considering who his advisors will be. Louis XVIII realizes that France has undergone profound changes. And the idea that we could go back to the ancien regime is just, it would be a fool's errand. It's not possible. So he is going to allow for many things from the revolution to remain. He's generally speaking pretty moderate in his policies. Let's look at some of the things that he does. So number 1, it is a constitutional monarchy, right? There will be a constitution. It will be called the Charter. Now, there is a asterisk we need to put on this. As I mentioned earlier, he is going to say, yes, this constitution, the charter, exists. It defines the relationship of the government. However, this charter is a gift from me, your king, and it is not something that you forced upon me, right? So that is an important distinction we have to have here. He is also going to keep most of the rights that were issued in the Declaration of the Rights of Man. For example, there is going to be freedom of religion. You're not going to have to be a Catholic, or Catholics aren't going to get special favor or special privileges that others won't. Although he does say that Roman Catholicism is the official religion of France. So there is a little bit, so you can see here, he's kind of doing some things, but kind of not. They are also going to have a bicameral legislature. The upper part is chosen by the king. He picks the representatives. The lower part is voted on by the people. But hold on a second. We got to define who the people are. It is only the highest tier of propertied people in society. So a severely restricted electorate. Also, we are going to see the most moderate thing he does is he says hey, I know in the revolution in 1789, there was a lot of property seized from aristocrats, the Catholic Church, and some people became landholders and didn't pay for that land and they were allowed to keep it during Napoleon. Will allow property claims to remain. He does not take land that had been seized back. He allows those property changes that had happened during the revolution to remain, which is kind of like, whew, a sigh of relief for many French. So generally speaking, he's a pretty measured monarch. However, his government is just overrun by ultra royalist advisors and ministers. His brother, the Duc d'Artois, which is just fun to say, he'll be known as Charles X. He's going to be the man who takes over after his brother dies. Charles X is an ultra royalist. And what it means to be an ultra royalist in France in 1820, which is when we're talking, is that you have not reconciled yourself to the revolution and the changes that were made. And there is an innate desire to turn back the clock to 1788. So they are going to try to get in the ear of Louis XVIII, and they're going to try to enforce policies that severely restrict any sort of liberal reforms that have taken place. So what we are going to see, excuse me, Missy, is we are going to see a white terror take place where radicals and liberals will be attacked. We've kind of talked about that already. But we are also going to see that liberals are going to be forced out of government positions, that there is going to be censorship and detention for suspect people, that the royalists are going to try to impose a greater level of control and order on society that we have not seen since the days of the Ancien regime. And that will only continue when Louis XVIII dies and his brother Charles X takes over. So, stick a fork in that. Spoiler alert, it ain't going to work. Charles X will be overthrown in a revolution. Yes, another French Revolution in 1830. We will talk about that in our next video. Okay. What is the main takeaway from the Spanish Revolution of 1820? The main takeaway is that France goes inside of Spain, which sees their king, the Spanish king, is threatened by liberal military officers who try to impose a liberal constitution on the king. France says to the rest of Europe, hold my drink, I got this. They go in, they put down that coup. They don't take over. They don't do it to increase France's own strength and power or whatever. They do it to maintain the conservative order that has emerged. This is the first time something like that has ever happened. So what do all of these events we just talked about from 15 to 18 have in common? Conservatives are in charge and they are squelching any challenges to their authority. Now, when we meet again, what we will see is that these challenges from liberals and nationalists are going to continue, and the conservative order won't be as successful at fending them off all the time, although they will still remain mostly in charge of most places. Eventually, there will be a spasm of revolution in 1848 that threatens the conservative governments, but fails spectacularly and results in the even more entrenching of power by conservatives, even though it doesn't look like it's going to be like that at all when it begins. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's it for today. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any questions, how this video stuff is working for us. It's only for another week. I'm back on the 19th. We'll talk again soon, guys. All right, see you later.